Hello, everyone. Let me first start by introducing myself. My name is Anshuman. I am one of the co-founders at Scalar Academy, and my journey has been that I started my career as a software engineer at Facebook. Was part of the Facebook messages and chat team, led the team that built Facebook Messenger, and later on was one of the landing member team at Facebook London, helped set up that office, hired the first 100 engineers there. Now, today's session is about understanding what should you prioritize if you are also a software engineer starting your entrepreneurship journey. I've been through a very similar phase myself. So I have had a bunch of learnings from there. I've made so many mistakes, which I wish somebody could have told me about. So I want to maybe spend some time talking about what mistakes not to make, learn from my mistakes. So what mistakes not to make. So the way we are going to structure this is maybe around 20 to 30 minutes talking about what mistakes not to repeat, what should be the process of starting your entrepreneurship journey, and the next 20 to 30 minutes addressing questions that you have. All right, so let's begin. Now, few things that I would mention, which I have seen, or like few mistakes that I've seen most people make. I would love to address those as I talk about the journey to start a new company. And look, I mean, it's a very hot market. I mean, almost everything is getting automated by tech. It's probably one of the best times to be an entrepreneur right now. The market is I mean, people are moving towards digital because of Corona. People are adopting new products very quickly. So it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. But we as techies, we as engineers, we have some preconditioned thoughts. For example, when I started my journey, I thought that the most important piece is actually tech. If I write great code, if I work on a technically challenging problem that creates a great product, then I mean I would be successful. The reality is that product is has tech as one component. There are so many other components to it, including marketing, including your storytelling, including what is the user experience. Everything has to come together. But let's go step by step. Firstly, if today, let's say I want to start my journey as an entrepreneur, what should I look for? And this is the most important step. You have to first decide what problem am I solving. And one common mistake is people tend to prioritize problems that are interesting to solve rather than problem statements which are actually pain points of users. There is an interesting quote by Y Combinator which says that build something that users want. That's the most important part. You have to first come up with a problem statement that you are solving that you feel is a pain point for the users. It's a pain point for the end consumers. And just you believing that it's a pain point is not enough. What we as an engineers tend not to do often is talk to people. So what you should do is, as a step two, once you figure out that, let's say, X is a problem statement that I'm solving, as a step two, what you should do is you should go and talk to who your potential consumers would be. Prepare these 3 or 4 personas who are going to be your strongest users. Go and talk to them and validate what you believe is a problem is actually a problem. Validate from them that if you give them tomorrow a solution you're thinking of, they would love to use that solution. That is the first piece. The first piece isn't writing code. The first step is not writing code. For example, I was hosting Ankur Variku for a session internally within Scalar, and he was talking about his own journey where, just to validate his idea, and this was an idea around creating an app that helps you sleep better. What he did was, without any product in place, he started running ads. He started running ads to check if there is interest in such a product, and started gathering like people who would click on that ad and say that, hey, I'm really interested in actually using this kind of an app. Once he had validation, then he started building that app. It's important to, I mean, because this is the biggest step, right? Like the biggest step is, what problem statement do I work on? If I choose a problem statement that is inherently hard to solve, people don't really need, no matter how well I execute, I would not be able to create a successful business. So the first step is the most important step. You create or you choose a problem statement which is actually a problem statement. People really, really need a solution to that. And your solution somewhat resonates with the end consumers who are going to be using your product. That's step number one. It is also important to understand that products are of two kinds: vitamins and painkillers. Like just like when you have a headache, you're immediately looking for a Disprin. That is a painkiller. There are, however, vitamins which are good to have. Products also fall in those two categories. I usually have a painkiller. For example, I just ran out of my recharge on phone. I need to recharge my phone with more money. That's a painkiller use case. That's not a good to have. Versus, let's say, there's something fancy that I might use, I might like enjoying, etc., etc. I mean, that is a vitamin use case. Painkillers are easier to sell. So if your problem statement is a pain point which you're building a painkiller for, it's easier to spread it to the end consumers. Vitamins are harder to sell. So that's step number one. Step number one, figure out a problem statement that is actually a problem statement. Figure out a solution that users care for. Does that make sense? The second step, well, if you're done with the step number one, which is, by the way, a big portion of the journey already solved, the second step is get to the solution as soon as possible. One of the other mistakes that I see people doing is they over optimize on building a perfect solution. I mean, and I can understand that, like, all of us want to build the best product, build this thing that they can be really proud of. So they want to make sure that I'm building this so polished, such a good UI, nothing ever fails, everything is running perfectly, even if that means me taking maybe 6 more months to release the product. That's not always the best approach, because nobody ever, I mean, this is, I'm not even Steve Jobs or some of the best entrepreneurs that you see, nobody ever was able to scale the first product that they released. They always had got feedback as they launched. They had to change the product. As they changed the products, one version of the product started to fit with the audience. So you have to assume your first product, whatever you launch, is not going to be what is going to scale. You have, that is just a validation whether it is working or not. So optimize to get to one release version as soon as possible, something that works. Even if it is half broken, that's fine. The moment you release, then you start to get feedback from users. People would tell you that this is not working, that is not working. Maybe if X was done in some other fashion, it might have been more useful. As you start to get more feedback from the users, you'll start to realize what is a perfect solution. Build that well. The other benefit of actually not building something perfect, and this is, as Kunal Shah says, that if people are using your product, even though it is imperfect, that shows that there's actually a need for your product. Let's say when Paytm was first launched, I the only way of recharging my phone prepaid was going to a shop, and like Paytm gave me this massively better option of just recharging online. Even if the website would have been broken, I would have still tried multiple times to get the recharge done from there, because it solves a major use case. That shows that there is a big product market fit, right? So it is important to not build a perfect solution as the V0. The third step, and this is again, like, maybe not the third step, but the one thing to keep in mind when you're building this imperfect solution is, figure out what is your minimum viable product. It is called MVP. MVP is, figuring out your MVP is important, because the other mistake that most software engineers make is that they believe that more the number of features, the better is the product. To be honest, if you look around at the most successful products out there, they have one core feature, one or two core features, not more than that. For example, think about WhatsApp. WhatsApp has nothing. I mean, WhatsApp is hardly fancy. It just allows you to send messages, simple. Or look at Google Calendar, for example. Such a simple product, right? Like, you can just block times and that triggers an email. I mean, it is important to understand that 100 features don't win. clarity of what you're building, what is your core, that wins. And therefore, in early days, when you're building your first version of the product, you have to stick to your core. Don't build 100 features, build one feature. And that is a difficult choice. In the beginning, it is a difficult choice that which feature should I pick, because when you're starting with a journey, you're so excited, you feel, hey, let me build this as well, and the user would be able to make this conference call, would be able to do this, that, and so many things. Don't do that. Try to pick one core feature and build for that. So that's again just a little more contour into step two. Step three, and actually this is not step three in chronological order, but it is important in how you form the product. Once you understand a problem statement, once you obviously, like, your solution would keep changing. So you're married to the problem statement, solution would keep changing. But the most important aspect of a business actually winning is the team that works with you. And initially, to be honest, the first few members of your team are your co-founders. Now, co-founders, if you look at teams that have actually become big companies themselves, there are few common elements that most companies had. One, a lot of companies that became big, and this is not the rule, but a lot of companies that became big had multiple co-founders. Doing this such huge journey alone is a very hard journey. So it's good to have companions on the path. There as well, however, having co-founders who are complementary to you, which means they have skills that you don't have, gets you just further ahead in the journey. For example, let's say even within tech, let's say I'm a great backend developer, right? But I know that front end is equally important. If I find a co-founder who is equally good in front end, that's great. As I said, product is not only about tech, not only about building backend and front end. It is about storytelling, marketing, what is the UX of the product. So again, if you can find somebody who comes from a very strong marketing background, strong storytelling background, strong UX background, those people are also great to have as co-founders. Business is equally important. So again, like, if you can find somebody from the business background, that's also great. If your founder team is very diverse, and you have, I mean, don't get too many founders as well, but if you have 2-3 co-founders who all have complementary skills, your chances of success certainly become or increase multifold. There, however, one other thing that I would request you to do is you have to trust your co-founders. So be sure that your co-founders are also willing to take this journey for the long duration, long haul. They're married to the problem statement. They are really, really passionate about the problem statement, and therefore you wouldn't have these conflicts or people leaving midway of the journey. So that's step three, which is team, especially the co-founding team, as complementary as possible, better it is. Now, and I'm stressing on this point because all of us as software engineers, when we are working at companies, we only get exposed to one part of the development process, right? Which is only tech. There is somebody behind the scenes who's doing marketing, somebody behind the scenes who's doing storytelling. We normally don't get exposed to that. And it is therefore very easy to get into the trap that marketing, storytelling, etc. is not important. They're very important. Some companies have succeeded only on the basis of storytelling and marketing. So important to give weightage to that too. So that's step number 3. Step number 4, once you build your product, initial few days of the journey, as Paul Graham from YC also says, has to be spent doing things that do not scale, which means as you get users who are using your product, talk to those users. Keep talking to each and every single one of your users just to understand if they are going to leave your product, why are they leaving the product. This is an approach that does not scale when you have 100,000 or 1 million users or 10 million users or 100 million users. But it is important to do in the initial part of your journey, because then you understand your users really well. You understand what is their persona, why do they use your product? And therefore, if you have to make them stick for longer, what decision should you take? It is said that leadership or great leaders are people who can instinctively also take decisions that are right most of the time. That instinct comes from actually talking to your users, doing things that do not scale in the beginning of your journey. So do that. That is step number 4, do things that do not scale in the beginning of the journey. Talk to as many users as you can. Understand how happy are your users, what are they really doing day by day, and when are they transitioning out of the product. Step number 4 or 5, I mean, I am not sure, but step number 5, then after that, once you've done things that do not scale, is even if you're a techie, even if your job might be to just write code to begin with, I mean, as a co-founder, you'll have to wear multiple hats. So then step 5 is you start to learn at least analytics tools. For example, the easiest one that you can get started with is Google Analytics. So start using Google Analytics. That shows you great stats on your daily active users, monthly active users. It helps you do cohort analysis, which means how many of my users are coming back on the second day, on the third day, on the fourth day. How many users are still coming back after a week, after a month? What is my retention period? It helps you measure all of that. That is very important as you start scaling. And finally, I mean, as a software engineer, it is important to measure everything. So as you evolve in the journey, the final step is to make sure that everything that you care about, the North Star, which is the final goal that you care about, is all measured and is there on this one dashboard that you look at day after day, every single day. You see whether that is going up or whether it is going down. When it is going down, you start to panic. You start to figure out what has to be done to get it back up. So be data driven later on, not initially. So that would be my advice for everybody beginning. The most important part of the advice is be careful about choosing the problem statement you work on. Talk to your users before launching the product. Validate that your solution is actually working. Don't be married to the solution, be married to the problem statement. It's a very common mistake that you say, hey, I'm not getting to use very fancy technologies, let me use machine learning, let me use AI, let me use this or that, and then come up with a fancy solution. All of that fancy solution is all useless if your users don't want to use your product. So validating problem statement and solution with your users is the most important step, and we as a lot of software engineers tend to skip that step. That is one key takeaway I would request all of you guys to have. So that was my quick monologue on things to prioritize. I'll repeat again, just maybe very quickly. Problem statement and solution, very important. Speed to getting or releasing your product, very important. It is okay if it is imperfect. It is important to cut down on features and figure out what your MVP is. What is your minimum viable product? That is very important. Your team, your co-founding team, if it is as complementary as possible, better it is. As you scale, familiarity with Google Analytics is important. And in the initial part of the journey, do things that do not scale. Those are the 5-6 things that I would like you guys to take away from this session. Now, with that, I would open up the floor for questions. Okay, there's a question here, which is when should I think of approaching investors for funding? So, I mean, obviously, think from the point of view of investors. You get investment at multiple stages. Stage number 1 is when somebody is incubating you. Stage number 2 is when you raise your seed fund or pre-seed fund. Then you do your Series A and so forth. Ticket sizes vary. If I am an investor, in the early stages, investors invest on either of the following, right? Like the team strength and problem statement depth. I'll elaborate on that. Or they invest on early traction. I'll elaborate on both. Now imagine I am working on a problem statement, which is very deep in nature. Everybody needs it. For example, let's say hypothetically, I'm building the next Amazon. I'm Flipkart, and I'm just building this online shopping for everyone. I know that everybody spends a lot of money buying stuff from markets. If I can change the behavior for them to go and buy online, the market is huge because every single person spends a lot of money on buying stuff. So then I know that market is very huge. Then I look at what is the strength of the team. If the team actually has the right to win, which is like you're an expert in that field, I as an investor would love to fund and make sure that I'm part of your journey. Probability, right? Probability of winning is higher. Or the second thing is Maybe I don't come with the highest of credentials as team. That's fine, however. If I can show early traction that, hey, look, I mean, problem statement is great. And I look here, I have early traction. I have these users who are super happy. I've created a product, may not be perfect product, but people are using my product. Then also investor would be interested in spending with you. So either, and then like, look, it's hard to optimize the team aspect, right? Like you are who you are, but you can change the traction aspect. So best that you approach the investor once you've already launched some basic version of, and as I said, like don't go for perfect product, launch some basic version of your product, show some early traction, show that I have, let's say, these 50,000 users or 100,000 users who are using my product and are spending money on it if it's an e-commerce thing. Show traction in some form, and then you go and talk to investors. Okay, I'll take more questions. The next question is, I'm a student. What is recommended for me if I want to start up? Should I do job first few years, and or can I start now? And Nirmal, to be honest, the answer is driven by two factors, right? One is, what is the kind of financial stability that I have if you want to start up, any of you, and this goes true for all of you. If your reason for starting up is driven by that I will make a lot of money immediately, believe me, that's not going to happen. If you're starting a new journey in startup, for the first few years, it is possible that you're not making any money. In fact, it is possible that you're spending money from your pocket. And that is an important call to take, because if you start building your startup to generate money from day one, you'll most probably not be able to do that. It's extremely hard, and you'll most probably end up giving far too soon. Startup is a very hard journey to take for a long period of time. So if you're financially well to do, which means you have a few years ahead of you where you don't need money right now, and therefore you can take the right call or right decision for your startup, then that's the first point, right? Like then you start with that. Second point, obviously, is the problem statement. Do you currently have a problem statement that you believe requires a solution I should go and solve? Those are the two important factors. It does not matter whether you're a student or not, because there are a lot of companies that come out of colleges. For example, one of the recent companies I've been talking to, actually I was talking to maybe a year back, 2 years back, was a company called FamPay. All of their founders had never been in a job. They were just in their fourth year, about to graduate, and they are fairly big now. I mean, they started from college. They're doing fairly well. College actually gives you a environment where you can test your product really quickly. It's a closed setup. You have 100, 500,000 people around you. If you send them a message, they will give you unfiltered feedback. They'll tell you what it is at your face. It's a closed ecosystem and helps you give feedback fairly quickly. So I wouldn't say that being in a college is makes you any less than any other founder. Being in job gives you certain amount of financial security. If you are financially well to do, you can start earlier. As I said, like the most important aspect, apart from financial independence, is also the problem statement you're working on. Are you excited by it? Do you believe it's a big problem statement to solve? And users really need the solution you're building. There is another question which is by Raj, which is, what is your take on India versus US versus Europe for launching a tech startup? Now, the definition of a tech startup, I'm assuming, is a startup that has a tech product at its core. There are two kinds of tech startups, right? Like there is a tech startup that caters to businesses, which are called enterprise SaaS businesses. SaaS is software as a service. So imagine I build something, and I, instead of selling it directly to the consumer, I sell it to companies. Companies use it to solve one of their use cases. That is enterprise company. The second kind of companies are B2C, which is I go and directly sell to the users or consumers. For enterprise SaaS, most companies, even in India, when they start while they build their team in India, they build their product in India, they try to sell to companies in the US, because that's a deeper market. Companies are much more willing to pay in the US or in the Europe versus companies in India, because the Indian ecosystem is still evolving. Most companies haven't reached a scale where they can freely spend without caring about the margins. US is a very different ballgame. There is just much more depth there, and therefore most enterprise SaaS companies are built with US as the audience. When you're building a consumer company, however, there are a lot of really, really good, really in-depth consumer companies that have come out of India. For example, if you look at, Glance, which is by InMobi, or ShareChat, or Zomato, Swiggy, Flipkart. All of these are consumer companies. So, there maybe my answer would have been different maybe 8-10 years back, but today the ecosystem is fairly evolved. The amount of digital adoption in India is very, very high. There are a lot of internet users in India, probably more than the likes of Europe. So if you're building a consumer company, then you should launch in India. You should launch in India. It's easier on your pockets to begin with, and then sure, if your product has global appeal, you can look at expanding globally as well. So depends on what kind of startup you're building, Raj, enterprise or consumer. Vivek has another interesting question. How do I validate that idea is really important for the end users? Is running fake ads the only way? So no, it is not. It is not. Look, you would have. Conversations are still the most basic form of communication. Talking to people is the most basic form of communication, and it is still very, very powerful. So Vivek, imagine hypothetically, let's say I'm building this website that lets you call up doctors and have conversation or video chat with them, right? Now, if you believe that your consumers for this app are going to be, let's say, elderly people because they need this way more, or let's say people in their middle age, etc., pick up a sample of those folks, maybe in your society or people around you, and go talk to them. Talk to them that, uncle, here is what I am thinking of building. I feel that this is a pain point. I'll build this. It'll be very simple to use. Would you like to use this if I give it to you for free? Try to validate from people around you, right? So it's not always that you have to run ads. Ads is when you want to test it out at scale. But conversations, human conversations are really powerful. When you talk to people, then you get more understanding of where all they struggle. They'll tell you themselves. If it's a pain point, they'll tell you. हिंदी में बोलते हैं भड़ास निकालेंगे वो. So that is going to happen. So you'll get to validate. The next question is from Parikshit. So Parikshit says, if I'm developing a product for someone else and assuming that I'm the only one to do all work with no established company, what should be my business model and finance strategies? Parikshit, when you say you're developing a product for somebody else, are you saying that you're running a service company where you're sort of doing the product development for a company that comes to you with a idea, tells you some product specs, and then just pays you for developing the product? So Parikshit, running a service company is there you don't need to actually. So when you're building a product for somebody else, then to be honest, like whether that product works or not, you are less on the hook for that. If it works, great, but to be honest, you're building it for the vision of somebody else, right? Now that person has a vision, that person has a go-to-market strategy in place, they have certain budget allocation, etc. You really can't control that. So what you should look for is, if you're building a service company, you need one partner who can go and procure projects for you, which is your sales process. So you have constant inflow of these kind of projects which you can build and then get paid for that, right? So you do that. As the volume of project increases, you can bulk up your team so that your revenue also increases with time. So in your case, I would say like those are the two things to optimize for. One is, first start with a small project, see whether you can deliver at very high quality where your clients are really, really happy. Then expand to include somebody who can help you go and procure projects, help make a pitch, which helps you differentiate from everybody else. And then as your project inflow increases, you hire more people to help you deliver at a faster speed, more developers that help you deliver at a faster speed. All right. So Kiran has 2-3 questions. I'll read through the question. The question is how to deal with a problem statement if you're from another background or have experience in another field and you want to try in the field where you don't have any experience, but you know that you have addressed a great problem which is solvable or which is like need of people having potential to scale at huge level. And one more thing. So the advice we get from elders that first gain some experience or save some money, then start your business / entrepreneurial. I'm not talking about researching about the field. So if you know that you have a problem statement that is actually a problem statement or a burning need for people, one quick way of getting experiences that from that field, try finding a co-founder. If and like be very clear about the superpower that you have. For example, Kiran, it is possible that you might be a software developer, right? So you can build the solution if you know what the solution would look like. So now you imagine, let's say I'm trying to build something for the medical fraternity, all doctors and nurses. So I try to find a co-founder who also buys into the vision. I mean, a doctor or a nurse, if it's really a burning problem statement, should be able to see that this is actually a problem statement. If somebody can build a solution for that, this would work. So convince this one person to come become your co-founder. Then, I mean, with time you will learn. Once you take the plunge, you will learn. I mean, you don't need to know everything right on day one. Our society, however, is a conservative society. We have gone through a lot of hardships as societies in India, right? Like there have been famines. Therefore, all of our elders always would advise you to take the safer path. Safer path is, hey, go build up your savings, gain experience. Once you have enough savings, then you start experimentation, which is where you do your startup and then you move ahead. I agree with the savings part. You have to be financially secure. You don't want to get into a state where you have to push your business to start making money if your business is not ready yet. But I mean, on the experience part, there are ways of getting more experience by actually finding, as I said, like team is the most important aspect, right? So find more people who are complementary to you, maybe people who understand that domain better, and work with them to create a product that serves its use case. For example, I mean, look at founders, right? Like Dipinder Goyal was a great product manager. He had nothing to do with restaurants, but still was able to build Zomato. There's a question from Ritwik, which is 95% of the startups fail. How to ensure that my startup is economically feasible? I wish there was a clear cut answer to that. As I said, like there are a few common mistakes to avoid so that your probability of succeeding is not 5%, but rather 50% or 60%, which is, as I said, like choose a problem statement that really matters, choose a solution that really works, talk to your users, which shows you that your product would get adoption, then build and then launch. Again, make sure you're faster to the launch. No need to be perfect. Once you have validation, then you start building on top of that. All of those help you increase your probability. So therefore, I mean, and then like of the 95% of the startups that fail, a lot of them fall in the buckets of common mistakes that I told you. So your probability of failing would be lower if you have the right team, if you have taken the right structure to the solution. That being said, I mean, there is no clear cut formula for succeeding in the startup world, because if it was, I mean, almost every single startup would be successful. There would be tons and tons of millionaires and billionaires in the world. That's not the case. So so there is some amount of subjectivity to succeeding, but like there are at least certain common mistakes which you can avoid. Manoj says, do you really need to be strong in DSA when starting it? Absolutely not. DSA has nothing to do with starting a company. I mean, if you're good at software development, that helps, because that helps you get a product out quickly, but it's absolutely not a requirement to succeed. Okay, here is an interesting question. Should I even bother if there are multiple competitors of the same problem statements already present in the market for quite some time? Depends on what is your approach to solving. How many of you have heard about the company Misho? I can see that some of you have. Okay. Let me describe what Misho does. So the problem statement was exactly the same, right? Like I need to buy a lot of stuff. How can I get that stuff reliably with confidence at the most convenient way possible? Flipkart had one way of solving it. And if you remember, during that time, there were already a bunch of players. Like Flipkart was there, Snapdeal was there, Amazon had already come in. There was Infibeam and a bunch of other e-commerce websites that were trying to solve the same problem statement. Now, Misho said that there could be another way of addressing the same problem statement. What if I use local influencers, right? So there's an auntie in my society who is very trusted. What if she actually starts to sell certain products that she trusts, she likes, right? So then she says that, for example, there's this particular sari. I have tried it. It's brilliant. If any of you need the sari, then I can get it to you at this particular price, right? And That's how social e-commerce was born. And Misho, what they did was they initially started on WhatsApp. They said we don't need a product because we want to validate whether this would really work or not. So they started with WhatsApp. They on WhatsApp they started creating a community of these aunties who would then go and sell in their respective societies, and that started to work. Problem statement was still the same, just a different solution. So the answer there is that if you're doing the same thing which everybody else is, if you have the same solution as everybody else, then please don't bother. Those players are already way ahead of you in the journey. They have done so many mistakes and learned from them. They have better teams, better capital. Chances are you'll fail. However, if you have a refreshingly different approach to the same problem statement, you believe that your approach might work, it is not easy for a Flipkart or Snapdeal to replicate, then please do go ahead, give it a try. Meesho, for example, today is a unicorn. It's a multi-billion-dollar company now. The next question is from Pragya. So Pragya says, like, for a business idea that takes an existing idea and executes it significantly better, should the focus be on shipping ASAP or making the product better than the competitors before launching? Okay, that's a tricky one. So if the thesis is that I would execute it slightly better than the competition and therefore I will win, there also, to be honest, there has to be an initial proof that people are actually looking for something better. For example, let's say if I say I'm going to build a better Wikipedia. Now that problem statement makes sense if people are pained by the fact that a lot of articles on Wikipedia, they are incomplete, or I can't understand those, and therefore I believe that there is, let's say, a need for a better Wikipedia or need for a better content website. If that pain point exists, then sure, then what I would say is maybe launch in a narrow fashion. Quality then becomes important, obviously, like that is your differentiator, but then launch narrow. Don't launch at the scale of Wikipedia. Maybe pick a very small domain, let's say some small portion of software engineering or some small portion of medical. You create a lot of very high quality interactive articles there, and then launch as your V0, and see what is the response you're getting from that community. Do those people start moving away from Wikipedia and start using your website for articles in that domain? If that starts to happen, then you go and scale that approach. So yes, launching half-baked things does not work if your business thesis is that I'll create a better version. But then, there, just to make sure you're not spending a lot of effort on something that might fail later on, it is important to keep the field narrow so that your effort to launch is still small. It isn't too high. Samriddhi has a question, which is, can I sell course online? And that's such a wide problem statement. Sure, you can, but everybody is, right? So figure out what your differentiator is. What is the pain point that other people are not able to solve and you would be able to solve? Then sell it online. Sure, why not? Devendra has a question, which is, what if we create a different category of business altogether? So most businesses that are very, very successful are mostly category creators. For example, Meesho now is not put in the same category as Flipkart. Meesho is a separate category. Social e-commerce became a separate category. Very similarly, there was a time when every single reading material was on Coursera, which was your edtech was Coursera in the beginning. Then cohort-based courses started. For example, Udacity came into being, Udemy came into being. Actually, Udemy is still very similar to Coursera, but Udacity was a separate category. So a lot of very successful companies are different categories in themselves, because over a period of time, their solution approach is so different that it starts getting perceived as a separate category. Even, if you can create a separate category, if you can convince people to adopt your product, nothing like it, then you're destined to become much bigger. All large companies are category creators and category leaders. Like, today's session is only about discussing entrepreneurship. It's important for us as a society to embrace entrepreneurship, right? Because if you're a society of creators, if we start creating companies, we'll start generating jobs. We just on the macro scheme, there is a new Silicon Valley being built out at different places in the world. The more all of us get into that mode, that if I see a problem, I'll solve that problem, the better we'll start building for the world. um, we are a huge supply of talent, right? Like probably the biggest supply of talent in the world. We have the largest youth capital. If you look at the phrase youth capital, it embodies the same fact that having a lot of youth with a lot of energy, with a lot of potential, is a capital. India is blessed to have a lot of youth capital. If all of us start thinking of problem statements and solutions, and we start thinking of how can I build those solutions, we'll all grow faster. I mean, some of us will fail, some of us will succeed, but overall as an economy, overall as a society, will grow faster. Last two questions. Question number one is, how do you find, which is from Pragya, which is how do you find mentors to guide you in your entrepreneurship journey? Actually, this is a very important question. So, to be honest, like all of us, at least for the initial few years, we need people who can help us. Why? Because a lot of mistakes that you'll make initially in your journey can be avoided if you're talking to the right people. They would have made those mistakes themselves. They can tell you what not to do or what to look out for. So having coaches or mentors in the initial part of journey is very important. In fact, there's a book called Trillion Dollar Coach. So there are three companies, Google, Apple, and I'm forgetting which was the third one. But all three founders were coached by the same person, and therefore the $1 trillion coach, because all three companies combined have valuation higher than $1 trillion. Having the right coach makes a difference. Now, one thing which you'll also notice is that the barriers for finding mentors, good mentors, actually resides more in our head than anybody else's. When you approach people and when you ask for help with a very clear objective that I'm going to be doing this, can you help me? Can you advise me? You'll find that people are very, very open to helping out. People are very open for mentorship. That has been at least one of our learnings at Skiller. We get so many people as mentors who probably don't make a lot of money. They're doing just for the goodwill of helping people, helping other students. So people are nice at heart. If you go and approach people and ask for help, you'll find help. It's like in Harry Potter, it was said, help is given to those who seek for help. If you seek for help, you'll find help. But very important. I mean, I would highly recommend that if you're starting your entrepreneurship journey, find a mentor. Find a mentor that you trust. You'll find that just significantly changes the probability of outcomes. Ankit has another question, which is, what should a business prioritize? Cost, quality, or time? So, to be honest, if you look at what do you have in life which is most limited, the most limited asset in life is time. Everything else has can be. I mean, quality cannot be quantified, but cost or money or capital is infinite in nature. If you build something nice, you'll find capital. But time, I mean, everybody has those 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. So a business usually goes into 3-4 phases. Phase number one is where you're figuring out your product market fit, which means me choosing a problem statement, me coming up with a solution that actually works. That is when your product has a market fit. Like my product is actually works. That's phase number one. There you're just finding the right answer, right? It isn't about cost, it isn't about time. You're trying to find the right answer by iterating as quickly as possible. Iterating quickly actually buys you time. The second phase of the journey is, now figured out the product market fit. Now let me scale and grow. In the growth phase, you're trying to buy time with money, because when you're growing, when you have found your product market fit, then like you can either grow really, really slowly, or you can grow fast. The risk with growing slowly is that somebody else will copy you and might overtake you. So therefore you try to buy time by throwing money at the problem, and that's why you go and raise money from external capital. But to be honest, like if you look at yourself, you have limited time. I mean, you have few years that you would want to give to, maybe few decades that you might want to give to your startup journey. That is limited. Capital you can raise. If you're truly building something exciting, capital you can raise. So I would say, like, you should think about the time with that respect, that I have to, wherever I can buy time, let me go and buy time. I'll take one more question, because that's an important question, which is, if I have a lot of ideas, how do I identify which one is scalable and can have a great impact? Now, while there is no clean framework, there are certain variables that can help you. decide that. One is what is called as market size. Market size is, if let's say I was able to build a product that was wildly successful, how many users in the best case can I get? For example, if I am building, let's say I'm building this solution that helps hospitals like track their patients better, then my market size is the number of hospitals in the world. And then like I do some calculation, if there are, let's say, x number of hospitals in the world, if everybody, even let's say if 10% of the hospitals buy my software, if my price point is xyz, then my market size is some xyz into 10, like hypothetically, right? So then that's how you compare for all of your ideas, what is the market size. The second aspect is, what is the ease of the market. What do I mean by ease of the market? Ease of the market is, if I look at a market, let's say where I'm trying to sell to the hospitals, if there are already a lot of players that are trying to sell to hospitals, and I know that selling to hospitals is really hard because it takes a lot of time to gain their trust, then I know that it is a difficult market. So while let's say my market size might be high, hypothetically, it is a difficult market to capture. Of all of the ideas, again, you on a Excel sheet, you put maybe ease of market, easy, medium, hard, whatever, like based on what you understand about the market right now. So you have market size, you have ease of market, and third is, what is your right to win, which is, I mean, do I have the highest probability of winning in this market with whatever I know about myself and my team? Do I believe at the core that I'll build something that will capture this market? At the end of the day, I mean, all of this contributes to your probability of winning. So as you do all three, it should give you some comparison points on which ideas are winning versus which ones are not. That is pure math. There is one softer aspect of thing, which is what idea actually excites you a lot more than others. And then, in my opinion, that is the most important aspect. While you can't put that in numbers, but whenever you start a new company, expect that to be a multi-year journey. I have seen some people take bets that, hey, let me spend 6 months on this idea. If it works, great. Otherwise, I'll leave it. No startup journey is ever 6 month journey. If you have to truly solve a problem, most startups die because you give up too early. If you have to truly solve a problem, you have to be at that problem statement again and again and again for multiple years. So if you were asking me, I would say, of all of the ideas that you have, or maybe give a lot of weightage to the idea that excites you the most, idea that you feel most passionate about. So in your Excel sheet, 4 parameters: what is the market size, what is the ease of doing business in that market, what is your right to win, and how excited are you about the idea. You can give weightage according to you. According to me, you should give the highest weightage to the fourth parameter, and that helps you decide which idea to take. Okay, there are a couple more questions which I'll just take very quickly, and then I'll end the session. One question is looking at ads as a source of revenue still a good idea? Look, I mean, if you have to look at ads as a source of revenue, and if you have to build a sizable business, your business has to have massive amount of traffic. When I say massive, I mean think Facebook scale or Google scale. That's not easy. If you have core belief that you can get to that scale, which is a very difficult journey, to be honest, then sure, I mean, you can look at ads as a viable source of revenue. But it's a hard journey. Like, just telling you upfront, it's a hard journey. I mean, you have probably less than 10 players who have that kind of distribution in the world. 10 companies, I mean. So very hard journey. And the second question was, what kind of business opportunities do you see in the B2B domain? Actually, I cannot answer that question because there's so many opportunities and there are a lot of people doing very exciting work. Instead of asking me, what you should do is, as you work with people, as you work with companies, as you talk to companies, figure out like what their most or the biggest pain point is. What are the solutions for those pain points, and can you build something that might be better? There isn't an obvious B2B unsolved problem statement right now that I see, at least in front of me. Awesome. This was a great session, guys. Like, really great to see a lot of very insightful questions. I hope the session was helpful to all of you. I hope I was able to answer a lot of your questions. If there are few of the current audience that can go and start a company of their own later on in the future, I would consider myself very lucky. If you do, however, please do send me a message. I would love to help out in whatever capacity I can. It's going to be limited help, but I mean, whatever help I can give, I would be very happy to. With that, I'll end the session here. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for hearing to me my monologue. I hope this helped you get better clarity on your steps ahead. Bye, everyone.